Before we get into today's video, I want to make you guys aware, over 85% of you guys that watch my videos are not subscribed. So make sure, go down below, check. Are you subscribed? Is it your first time here? Make sure you hit the subscribe button and enjoy the video. What's going on, guys? Jay Hoyd back with you today. Welcome back from the summer. It's officially time. The NHL is back. We are back here. It's the start of training camp. Preseason will be soon enough. Preseason games will be really soon. And then, of course, the regular season will be dropping very, very shortly. And I could not be more excited. I know everyone's excited about football season. It's back, and it's like, there's only one thing that football season being back means, and it's that hockey is right after that, and it's coming very soon. But of course, we had a great summer with the Vegas Golden Knights. Above me, Stanley Cup champs. We got the jersey on too. Obviously didn't really mention it, but I did replace the banner that's back there, the flag, whatever you want to call it. We got a new one back there, of course. Had to get some merch to celebrate. But of course, it is every team's goal that wins the championship that the next year they want to do it again. So I wanted to go back and take a look through all the moves through the offseason for the Vegas Golden Knights and kind of see, how we did. Do we do good things? Do we do bad things? Do we lose a lot of our players? What did we do this offseason that can make us contenders once again? Well, let's just start with the biggest move of the offseason, and let's look at the positives first. We re-signed Ivan Barbashev for 5 years, $5 million. Now, obviously, he was late to the party a little bit, got acquired at the deadline, and obviously he was a big part of our team. Played on the first line with Eichel and Marchessault for a while, and was a pretty good acquisition overall. Like, you can't argue with that. Now, would I have just given him a big contract at 5 years, $5 million? I don't know. But what did that mean for the rest of the team? Because obviously, that's a big contract. Well, it meant trading away one of the original misfits in Riley Smith. He got traded away to the Pittsburgh Penguins for a third-round draft pick. He had 2 more years at $5 million on his contract, so you get Barbashev, who I think is a couple years younger. It's like 3 or 4 years younger. Same contract, kind of. So it's tough seeing an original misfit, traded away, and a guy that's meant so much to the Vegas Golden Knights organization ever since it first started. And it was mainly a cap move. Either you'd have to get rid of Riley Smith, or you look back and you have to make, even a few other moves that would justify, signing Barbashev to that contract. So, that's the biggest loss as well, is trading away Riley Smith for a third-round draft pick. And it just sucks, right? But it's part of the business. You get a little bit younger. You get a guy that's going to play in your top 6 or definitely in your top 9, for a little bit longer, hopefully. I'd love to see Riley Smith back in the Vegas uniform, if it's all possible. Maybe with a reduced salary would definitely help that out. That's the biggest gain and the biggest loss for them. But let's look at the pluses for the offseason. And there actually isn't any, really. They signed Max Comtois to a professional tryout contract. Vegas hasn't really been one for PTOs at all. And it's not paid time off, for those that are wondering. Professional tryout contract. So kind of get an invite to training camp and preseason and kind of go from there, right? If you make the team, they might sign him to a contract and they'll go from there. But for the most part, we have kind of a full roster already with some guys that could most definitely fill in roles on this team. So when we look at the team, and of course we'll go more into this later on, when we take a quick look at it over here on Microsoft Excel, we're stepping up the game with our graphics here. And obviously this isn't the lines by any means, or who's going to play with who, or who do I think is going to play with who. Like, we're not getting that crazy into it. But when you look at our team, Max Comtois is one of those guys that could fit on that fourth line, could fit on the third line, probably a bottom 6 for sure type player. So they're going to kind of bring him in, get a good look at him. You know, he's also young. He's like 24, I think, years old. So he's a big boy, right? He's a 6'2", I think 6'3", 6'2", 6'4", somewhere in there. So, you know, decent height. You know, he plays with a good edge to his game. That he's not necessarily a superstar by any means, but, you know, he will definitely help out the bottom six or even just that fourth line in general. But the minuses. Now, when you think of minuses for a team like Vegas, you might be thinking, oh, well, if their team's really, you know, kept the same, who could be minus? Well, it's kind of the depth guys from last year. A lot of them that got signed or not even signed, but traded for at the deadline to provide that depth down the stretch. Jonathan Quick, he got signed by the New York Rangers, so he's over there. Laurent Brossoit went back to Winnipeg as a free agent signing. Teddy Bluger went over to Vancouver with a free agent signing. Phil Kessel, who is no longer with Vegas but is currently a free agent, which I would have loved to see him come to camp on a PTO, honestly. Obviously, three-time champion, and still, you know, he's still got the Iron Man streak, right? Like, even though he didn't play, but he was still healthy. So, would love to see that, you know, for Phil. Obviously, he's been around, he's won, and, you know, given the rest of this team, maybe he could come back in and kind of fill that similar role on that third line to give them some veteran depth and some secondary scoring as well. Another player, a really interesting case, is Nolan Patrick. Now, Nolan Patrick, they acquired to be a big part of their team, and it just didn't work out. He came in, you know, coming off injuries, and played for a little bit, looked okay, decent, and then got injured again, and then missed all last year, or I should say sat out all last year, you know, recovering from, I think it was concussions, or post-concussion syndrome, or whatever it was. And, you know, we talked about it in the what should they do in the offseason. I don't remember what I called that video, but what should Vegas do with their offseason, and especially with a player like Nolan Patrick, who didn't play last year. And, you know, they non-tendered him, which means his qualifying offer was like $1.4 million or something like that. And for a team that is fighting against the cap a lot, they couldn't really afford to give a player that is coming off an injury like that much money. Now, 1.4 as far as a NHL contract doesn't seem like that much, but, you know, when you look at the rest of the team, or you have some of these young guys that are up there, you know, 1.4, you know, you can get maybe one or even two players, you know, for that kind of money. But, you know, he is a free agent now, as far as I know. Will a team take a chance on him? Is he healthy, I guess, is the biggest question. But we'll love to see him back in Vegas, and hopefully he could kind of rejuvenate his career and go from there, because obviously he's a young player, and I'd really hate to see that, you know, go to waste, and such a young player, his career to be over so early. But our last player as a big minus, we talked about it earlier, Riley Smith, traded away to Pittsburgh for a draft pick. Now, obviously, we talked about it, you know, earlier, so we're not going to go too much into it, but obviously that was a big loss for Vegas. So there also was a kind of big shuffle in the coaching staff, and when I say shuffle, I mean they kind of moved around a lot. So Ryan Craig, who was an assistant coach in Vegas, has actually moved down to Henderson in the AHL. He is now their head coach. You also have, pardon my pronunciation on some of these, Misha Donskov. He was an assistant coach with Vegas. He has moved on to the Dallas Stars as an assistant coach. You also have Joel Ward, who was the Henderson assistant coach. He actually moved up to Vegas to be one of their assistant coaches, along with, is it Dominique Ducharme? Hopefully I pronounced that one right. But he got hired as an assistant coach as well. And then one of their former players, I believe one of the original Misfits, and Nick Holden. I know he played a couple other places since his time in Vegas, but he was hired as a developmental coach, a development coach. Not exactly sure what his title is, but a few changes to the coaching staff, and Bruce Cassidy, of course, still leading the way as the Vegas head coach. So really interesting to see such a head coach shuffle with the organization. But let's take a quick look at the lines here. So we'll slide over a little bit here and kind of take a look at it. Now, I know we touched on it earlier, but when you look at the team, now I know you're seeing lots of colors, but over on the right-hand side of that Excel sheet, actually, you guys can see my cursor in this one, is all over here, right? The NHL roster that could make the team on a PTO. There's only one of them, and then likely in the AHL/juniors or wherever they came from before this year is kind of what we're looking at. So when you look at this, try to match up the colors. If not, we're going to talk about it anyway. But Barbashev, Eichel, Marchessault, Stevenson, Carlson, Stone, Howden, Waugh, Carrier, Amadio, and Kolesar. I mean, that's pretty much, the roster from the last games or so. I do feel like Amadio, assuming he's in the squad this year as a depth forward or as a mainstay in the lineup, will play a bigger role this year, given that they are without some of their players from last year, their Teddy Blugers and some of their fourth line guys from last year. Could make the team. Now, this is interesting, right? So, Pavel Dorofeyev, actually came up and looked really good as a young player, scoring goals and providing some offense for a team that has a lot of, I'll say, two-way guys or power forward type guys. It's kind of nice to have a young player like him come in and do so well, down the stretch on the verge of a playoff run. And I don't think he actually played during the playoff run, but in the regular season, he was actually looking pretty good. So I would love to see him, get a real shot with some of these players. And like I said earlier, these are almost guaranteed not going to be the lines. But would be really cool to see Dorofeyev in the lineup somewhere, given that he's just young, talented, scoring type player, and let the rest of the guys here, do the two-way power forward defensive type stuff. Also on the verge there, Paul Cotter, who again was kind of in and out of the lineup, depth guy last year, could definitely be a bigger piece this year. Now I don't think he would be a great, third liner, but a maybe rotation fourth liner with Michael Amadio down there, maybe. But I don't really feel like he's at the stage right now where he could be a mainstay as that fourth line, just given what we kind of know of Vegas's even third and even fourth lines of how much they get relied on. I don't know if those two guys would be the right people to fit in there. Byron Froze? I don't remember hearing his name last year, but I know he did play at least a little bit down the stretch. As a depth guy, I don't feel like he's, has a chance to kind of break into this lineup because he is like a fourth liner, so maybe a 13th, 14th forward, but I would probably bet that he would start the season in Henderson. Same thing with Jonas Ronberg, a similar situation to Paul Cotter. I feel like he could come up and do a decent job and is another younger player and could come in and be a rotation guy, but I just, again, don't feel like he's there as a mainstay in the lineup. Then we have Max Comtois, who I think if he shows up, does well, can fit in the team, and they sign him to probably, $800,000, $900,000, contract 1 year, maybe 2 years. He is young, and he fits in somewhere on this team. I would definitely love to see him here. If he doesn't, then, hey, what's the worst that could have happened there? Tried him out, didn't work, no big deal. But we have a few guys there that are kind of on the verge of making the team, in my opinion. Now, when we look down at all the blue guys here, at least above the defensive players, that I'm not very familiar with a lot of these players, and obviously I know a lot of them are younger too. But some of these guys, I've either never heard of or just, again, don't feel like they're close to being on the verge like a Cotter or a Ronberg. So, could one of these guys, show up and perform and do well and, possibly be there late in the camp? Absolutely. I know Brendan Brisson's one of those guys that, is a young, future guy that is looked on to have high expectations. So I know he's one of them, but as far as the rest of the guys, I'm not very familiar with them. So I don't really feel like any of these guys are, going to make the team. So that's why I put them in likely AHL or junior. Now, when we look down at the defensive side, not a single thing has changed as far as the defensive core goes. Alec Martinez, Alex Pietrangelo, Brandon McNabb, Shea Theodore, Nicholas Hague, Zach Whitecloud, and Ben Hutton, the exact same 6 that have been there and has been there, relied on guys to be the defensive core on this team. And I don't really feel like that's going to change. Now, maybe do they try Hague up on the first line with Pietrangelo sometimes? Do they just stick with what worked last year and try to put Martinez with maybe Whitecloud, kind of switch it up a little bit, maybe switch up the second line? I mean, they could do so much with this defensive core. Or do they, again, just stick with what works and go from there? Now, as far as the defensive go down here, I do know some of these players. They did play last year. Mayo, Korchek, Mirmanov, is it Pachel? I don't remember how to pronounce his name. A lot of those guys played at least a few games last year. Again, there's no real room for them, so I doubt they're going to get, I couldn't really put them as could make team because of how solidified the defensive core is. Now, if you were to put, let's just say, Dyson Mayo up at the, 4th right defensive spot and as a could make team, then sure, whatever. But I don't feel like that's going to happen. I know there is a few injuries that are floating around. So I don't remember. I think it's Leonard, Mirmanov, and there's one other player I think that Kelly McCrimmon, their GM, said is going to be out for a little bit. But again, I just feel like with how solidified the defensive core is, there's not really any could make team options. Now, the most interesting position for the Vegas Golden Knights this year, I guess, is the goaltenders. Now, losing, who was it? Quick, Brossois, and I guess Leonard, which Leonard's still there, which we'll talk about, later on here. But it's basically a two-man show of Aiden Hill and Logan Thompson. Now, they basically said if there is going to be a third goaltender in the mix at all, it is going to be Yuri Patera, who did play at least one game down the stretch and looked to be pretty decent. So, I feel like, again, it's pretty solidified with Aiden Hill and Logan Thompson with the big new contract for Hill, and with Thompson returning hopefully to form and performing really well, that this will be a good platoon, I guess, if you will. And a lot of the team is pretty set in stone from last year, so we're looking for more of the same this year. And again, similar to the defensive core, I don't feel like a lot of these young goaltenders really have a chance as a could-make team. Patera would be, again, he's already kind of been confirmed as the kind of AHL starter, third goaltender guy, and the rest of them are all young or over here on, tryouts or invited to a training camp and will most likely go back to either the juniors or, wherever they came from, as far as, Europe goes or juniors, whatever. But either way, they're probably not going to be in Vegas. The last thing I wanted to talk about before we head out for the day is kind of planning for next year. I know this year hasn't even started yet, but just some things to look out for this season. And starting with, there is some pending free agents that do not have a contract for next year, and some of them you definitely want to be aware of. First one being Jonathan Marchessault. All these guys are pending unrestricted free agents, so he's a big part of your team, and obviously you'd like to keep him in Vegas, so hopefully we can get a deal done with him. Chandler Stevenson is definitely due for a bigger contract, assuming he does a similar performance this year. Will Carrier, fourth line guy, but he's already at $1.4 million. Hopefully they don't overpay that and, spend a ton of money on him. Now, he, if needed, I feel like he'd be okay on the third line, but he's a fourth liner, and I don't want him see him paid as a second liner, getting like $2.5-3 million. I just feel like it'd be a very, very big waste. That you'd want to keep Marchessault, you'd want to keep Stevenson, and I just really hope that his contract is like under, I'll say $1.5 million. Keep it under there, and I think we'll be okay. Next guy, Michael Amadio. I mean, it's a very small contract, but his contract is up this year. Alec Martinez, who I would love to see, assuming he stays healthy and still is obviously as good as he was last year, would love to see him re-sign. I don't want to see him re-signed at $5 million, though, like he's making this year. I'd like to see that come down a little bit, maybe like 2 years, $2.5 million. Something that is still something because of how good he is. but he's a veteran guy. He's already like 5 years old or something like that. So I'd like to see him there, but not at the price of $5 million. If it's at $5 million, then you might have to move on from him. But, you know, if you want to try to make it work, then I guess do that. But again, I wouldn't overpay him like that and put him anywhere above $2.5, $3 million. And our last guy is Ben Hutton, who is, again, similar to Amadio on a really low contract. But his contract is up this year, so I figured I would mention it. So there's no goalies up this year. Hill just signed the extension, and Thompson, I think, signed an extension either last year or the year before. So he's still got like another year or two on his contract. One big thing here, which I didn't mention, Robin Lehner, again, is starting the season on long-term IR, and it sounds like he is not going to be playing anytime soon. So, again, we know we have two goalies that are more than capable of, you know, playing games and obviously bringing us down the stretch and obviously winning a Stanley Cup. But as far as Lehner goes, I mean, his money is tied up in long-term IR. So if Hill and Thompson perform well again and Lehner gets healthy somehow this year, do we see a trade? Do we see a buyout? Do we see, you know, him just traded away for, you know, some prospect or some draft pick just to kind of get his money off the books? You know, that's just the hard thing about injuries is, you know, there is LTIR, but at the same time, you know, he's just kind of there and he's not really doing too much of anything. So I wish him the best. I want him to get healthy. I want him to get back on the ice. But if you already got two goalies ahead of you and you're coming back off injury after missing all of last year, you know, that's a tough road to come back from. But I think I covered everything that I wanted to. I think I, you know, checked out all the notes I had, and I'm very excited to see this year. You know, I say it every year, but hopefully I can watch more games and actually see them play, you know, more than just the highlights. Obviously, I'd love to go to a game, but Vegas is kind of far away from New York. So, you know, hopefully one day I'll be there in the Fortress and see a game live and hopefully be wearing the jersey and being as excited as the rest of the fans. But for now, we'll be watching from a distance, cheering them on, and hopefully we can add another banner to the books and add another, you know, memorable season upcoming. But that's going to do it for today's video. If you did enjoy, hit the like button down below if you haven't yet, or if you're brand new here, make sure to subscribe, turn those post notifications on to never miss an upload, and don't forget, you can always change your mind later. With all that being said, guys, we'll see you in the next one.